The Daleks are Doctor Who's most tenacious baddies. The first alien villains the show introduced, their initial appearance helped cement the programme's future beyond the first 13 episodes, and they've returned time and again to attempt universal conquest. The Daleks' single-minded pursuit of the destruction of all other life has enabled them to remain terrifying over 60 years later. Their instantly recognisable design and battle cry of "Exterminate!" have become iconic in their own right, independent of the show, arguably more iconic than any other imagery the show has produced. And with iconic status comes merch. The Daleks were an instant success and thus the subject of arguably the biggest merchandising boom in the series' history. In fact, the show's first non-TV fiction is centred around them, as the show itself developed its own style and desperately sought baddies that would equal the Daleks in the public consciousness. The Daleks themselves were given toys, books, clothes, even their own novelty Christmas song.
I'm gonna spend my Christmas with a Dalek and hug him underneath the mistletoe.
There's a reason why we call this period of the show's history Dalek Mania. Notably, most of these make little reference to the parent programme. Whereas new adventures with the Zarbi or the Vord would only take place with the Doctor present, the Daleks were a bit different. Their non-TV adventures occur in their own little world, building mainly off the backstory laid out in their first serial, The Daleks. Chief among these new Dalek outings was the TV21 comic strip simply titled The Daleks. Printed in TV Century 21, Jerry Anderson's tie-in comic for shows like Fireball XL5, Stingray, and eventually Thunderbirds and Captain Scarlet, the strip told the Daleks' backstory, showed them mastering new technologies and beginning their war of terror upon the universe. Tied into these were 3 annual-style books, a Dalek book, the Dalek World, and the Dalek Outer Space book, all of which seem to share continuity. Despite being quite isolated from the rest of Doctor Who fiction, the TV21 Dalek comic strips have ended up being one of the most influential and fondly remembered set of non-TV stories from that decade. No doubt the numerous reprints have helped somewhat in that regard. Numerous ideas and details introduced there ended up finding their way into BBC-produced Doctor Who, including into the TV show itself. So that's what we're doing today, going back through the TV21 Dalek comic strips and seeing how they either influence or predict later stories told with the Daleks. Let's get started. After the explosion of a neutron bomb store, 2 Daleks remained in humanoid form. Then they met the first of the new race of Daleks.
What is it? Do you not remember the war machine I invented before the explosion? You are right, Yaveling, but I don't understand.
The strange machine came nearer.
Who are you? Speak!
We are Daleks. Yaveling designed you.
No! He designed the machine! The bomb made me!
So the first thing that we're discussing forms part of a grand old Doctor Who tradition, writing stories that ignore and contradict previously released episodes. The first Dalek TV serial, which to avoid confusion we'll be calling The Dead Planet from this point on, presents the Daleks' predecessors as scientists and philosophers locked in a neutron war for 500 years with the other race on their planet, the Thals. After the explosion of a neutron bomb, the Daleks retire into their city protected by their machines. The Dalek casings draw their power from the metal floor of the city, making them unable to leave, the radiation slowly mutating the Daleks away from humanoid form. In the intervening time, the Daleks have developed a xenophobic attitude to the Thals, which appears to be news to them.
Why destroy without any apparent thought or reason? That's what I don't understand.
Oh, there's a reason. Explanation might be better. It's stupid and ridiculous, but it's the only one that fits. What? A dislike for the unlike?
This backstory was already in the process of being changed by the broadcast of the Dalek invasion of Earth, with the Daleks able to leave their city in the event of the Dead Planet being said to take place
a million years ahead of us in the future,
throwing the original timescale of the war out. Not something I actually agree with. Early Dalek chronology is incredibly complicated and I have my own theories, but let's go with this for now. The TV21 comic strip marks the first time that the origins of the Daleks are directly portrayed rather than being related, beating Genesis of the Daleks to the punch by about a decade. Being released so close to the original Dalek story, the comic does lean much closer to the original history than later retellings, but it does make its own changes. For example, the conflict is placed thousands of years ago rather than 500. Rather than being a race of teachers and philosophers, the Daleks here are led by a war chief, Zolfian, with the story making a point that the nature of the Daleks has become warlike itself with the death of their pacifist leader. The opening text even makes a point that the Thals are peaceful, living in fear of the Daleks, whereas Temesis states on screen,
the once famous warrior race of Thals are now farmers.
The Daleks on TV don't seem to be aware of any other race than the Thals, whereas the first Dalek here already has designs on the universe. To be fair, this had already been contradicted by the supposed placement of the Dalek invasion of Earth. The only neutron bombs that get used do so by accident. The original Daleks can't leave their city, but that doesn't appear to be bothering Fred here. Even the name of the humanoid Daleks is up for question.
They called them Dows then.
Not so far as the comic is concerned, it's Dalek all the way. Whilst we're here, is this a good time to mention to the wiki editors that these boxes at the end don't actually constitute part of the story, unless stuff like Dalek vouchers exist in universe? It'd be like saying an outfit for both Doctor Who and EastEnders meant they were both in the same universe. Wait, and also the Dalek comic that appears for a few frames in The Man from MI5 doesn't mean Thunderbirds and Doctor Who share a universe? For one, I know TV21 is meant to be presented as an in-Anderson universe newspaper, but the shared universe stuff doesn't actually work with the Anderson TV stuff anyway. And for two, how do we know this guy didn't have one of the reprints? The show's set in the future year 20... Matey Boy's unlikely to be keeping a vintage comic in his desk, and maybe the wiki could do with a tidy up on this point, as, search as you might, Lady Penelope doesn't actually appear in Duel of the Daleks. Sorry, got distracted. Anyway, point is, even this most loyal of retellings begins to add characters and events absent from the original. War Chief Zolfian and inventor of the robotic casings Jarveling are both key figures that you would think would be brought up in later retellings of the event, much as Davros now does in stories made after 1975.
Genetically engineered. By whom? By a genius, Van Stan. By a man who was king of his own little world. You'd like him.
Davros could in part be read as a merging of Zolfian and Jarveling. As per the latter, Davros is a scientist, but like Zolfian, the mindset of Davros is clearly what will be inherited by his creations. Genesis of the Daleks in fact runs much more counter to the events of their TV debut than the comic. The Dead Planet implies that the Daleks have undergone a massive change in character since the war, and whilst the Daleks in Genesis of Evil are more warlike than their TV counterparts, it's Genesis of the Daleks that depicts Khaled society. We seriously can't keep the name straight. That Khaled society has already embraced what will become Dalek ideals.
Our battle cry will be total extermination of the Thals!
Muters are the scarred relics of ourselves. Monsters created by the chemical weapons used in the first century of this war. They were banished into the wastelands where they live and scavenge like animals.
In other words, genetically wounded.
We must keep the Khaled race pure.
There's no neutron bomb explosion in Genesis of the Daleks, which, although not directly stated in the Dead Planet, is heavily implied to have been the act that ended the war.
We may have to explode another neutron bomb.
There is a rocket in Genesis of the Daleks, but it's loaded with distronic explosives and fired by the Thals at the Khaled Dome after it's weakened by Davros' formula. The Khaled Dome is another example. The Daleks in their debut mention retiring into the city after the war. The city in the TV21 strip isn't an exact match, but it's close enough to feel right. The Khaled Dome looks nothing like what came before, and the civilization beneath it, save for the scientific elite's base, is destroyed, wiping out the Khaleds. The Daleks could rebuild the city, in fact they do multiple times in the TV21 strip and eventually on the telly, but the phrase retired into the city implies the city was still mostly standing to me. Just to be clear, I adore Genesis of the Daleks, it's one of the most important Doctor Who stories ever made. But if you're looking for an accurate version of the Dalek origin as related in the Dead Planet, the TV21 strip is much closer. Basically, the point of all this is that continuity has always been secondary to story in Doctor Who, even so early as the second year, where the Daleks are made into interplanetary invaders as opposed to isolated survivors, and any attempt to make it work cohesively all as one unit is basically a mug's game. I should know, I've had an 800-page document on my computer trying to do just that since Jodie Whittaker's first season as the Doctor. What's really interesting about this version of the origin is that it has to present the story with the Daleks as the protagonists. As the Dead Planet and Genesis of the Daleks are Doctor Who stories, the Doctor and the TARDIS crew obviously take the protagonist roles. The Daleks in the Dead Planet act cruel right from the start, but it's possible to read a practical, albeit unkind view on their actions, with the mutated and as yet unseen Thals perhaps providing a reason as to why they treat intruders so harshly. Of course they imprison the Doctor's party, they're intruders. They can detect their prisoners are ill, but they can't do anything about it. They even let one of them fetch the Thals' anti-radiation gloves. Of course they can't go, they can't move beyond the city. It's only when the Daleks plot to let the Doctor's party die of radiation sickness, and we see the Thals they're so frightened of are kind pacifist people, that we can be absolutely certain of their true nature, confirmed by their plan to lure the Thals into the Dalek city to massacre them. The tension generated in that second episode of The Dead Planet is incredible, thanks in no small part to how the Daleks are used. By contrast, when Genesis of the Daleks was written, the Daleks were already long established as Doctor Who's ultimate baddies. We're not being introduced to them this time, we're being plunged straight into the horrors that created them. What's more, the Daleks themselves are mostly relegated to the background. The focus of the story is on Davros, their creator. taking a look at the person who would end up giving his corrupted worldview to the Daleks.
They are totally evil.
Evil? No! No, I will not accept that. When all other life forms are suppressed, when the Daleks are the supreme rulers of the universe, then you will have peace. Wars will end. They are the power not of evil, but of good.
The TV21 comics take a much lighter tone, relatively speaking at least, this is still a nuclear war that we're talking about, than either of these TV adventures, and instead focuses the Daleks' origins on the humanoid Daleks. The files are nowhere to be seen, bar that brief mention in the opening text. The focus of the story moves more from the horror of war on both the Daleks and the files, to just the fate the Daleks bring upon themselves. The Daleks are incredibly strong and versatile villains in that they work on multiple levels. You can examine the horror of their beliefs and make them truly frightening, or you can have them as cool shooty-shouty robots. Either option will work for particular kinds of story. Whilst the annuals focus mainly on the humans opposing the Daleks, allowing the Daleks to be their regular evil selves, if the Daleks of the TV21 strips are going to be the protagonists, they've got to be fun and engaging to watch, and their typical goals make it difficult to do that and still root for them.
If the Dalek gets out, it'll murder every living creature. That's all it needs.
But why would it do that?
Because it honestly believes they should die.
To combat that, the TV21 Daleks mostly lean into the cool robots angle, and tend to either fight other robots, monstrous and strange creatures, and duplicitous double-crossers. The nice and peaceful files, therefore, don't make the cut. This is why the opponents in the Daleks web series, the closest we've ever got to a proper Dalek spin-off series, ends up being the Mechanoids, some robot librarians, Joe Sugg, and a mass of green particles.
All hands on deck, swirly thing alert!
Amongst all the things the web series borrows from the comics and the annuals, there's a particularly noteworthy one. In making the Daleks the main characters, there actually needed to be consistent individual characters, as opposed to endless hordes of identical machines. And one character in particular ended up leaving quite an impression. Zolfir and Yarveling fought against time. They rebuilt the war factory.
I will be the Emperor! Get Flydor gold, quartz, and Arcanis flower sap! I must have a special casing!
A new race. A new system. These Daleks may be mutations, Zolfian, but their brains are 1,000 times superior to ours.
The Emperor's machine was completed. Then the last of the old Daleks died.
Work is not finished. We need more machines, but there are enough here to form an invasion force. We will attack and enslave workers. They will obey or die.
The first Dalek Emperor had spoken. His word was law. The idea of a Dalek command structure wasn't new to TV21. The Dalek Invasion of Earth had previously introduced both the Dalek Supreme Controller and the Saucer Commander, who seems to have taken on the colouring of a zebra crossing as camouflage. The comics, however, were home to the first appearance of a Dalek Emperor. The Daleks don't mention an Empire, nor do any other characters in their televised appearances, up until the appearance of an Emperor on screen in The Evil of the Daleks, written by David Whittaker, who was also one of the TV21 writers. That's not to say they don't have an empire, but up until that point on TV, if you're getting any Daleks other than the rank and file, it would be a Dalek Supreme. In the script for The Evil of the Daleks, Whittaker included this interaction.
So, you are the Doctor.
We meet at last. I wondered if we ever would.
I love the idea of these two being aware of each other but never meeting until now, and it's even more fun if you believe that these are the same Emperor. The comic Emperor makes his first appearance in 1964's The Dalek book, and in TV21 takes his first key role in the story Genesis of Evil, being the Dalek that confronts Zolfian and Yarveling before demanding a custom casing be made for himself. I absolutely love the look of the TV21 Emperor. I know there are those that don't and think he looks like a roll-on deodorant, but it's such a distinctive look that lends him a lot of character. It's also a look that's mostly unique to the comic version of the character. The Emperors that appear in The Evil of the Daleks and The Parting of the Ways are both immobile Goliaths, with the Emperor in the adventure game City of the Daleks resembling the latter in particular. Meanwhile, the Emperor seen in Remembrance of the Daleks shares the globe shape but lacks eye stalk, gun stick and plunger. This version is ultimately revealed to be Davros in disguise for some reason, the interior decoration of the prop presumably meaning the casing couldn't have a conventionally operated eye stalk, so why bother with the rest? The Doctor Who magazine comic Nemesis of the Daleks does however feature an Emperor in the TV21 style, implied to be Davros in dialogue. And like so much other continuity that doesn't fit, we now politely look the other way and pretend it didn't happen. A route TWM also eventually took with the strip Emperor of the Daleks, depicting Davros and the Dalek Emperor as two separate characters. A version of the TV21 design also returns for a key role in DWM's Liberation of the Daleks, a far more recent outing for the Daleks that pits him against a version of the evil design Emperor. Very meta story, that one. The TV21 design also ended up heavily influencing the Dalek Emperor seen in the Time Lord Victorious event, his appearance in the Daleks web series being the closest we've ever come to seeing this design in live action. I wish there was a proper Doctor Who equivalent of the Star Wars Black Series action figures where they draw from all the various stories and sources to create specific molds, because I'd love an action figure of this Emperor. If any character in the Daleks is the main character, it's the Emperor. Multiple events are depicted through the decisions he makes, and he's often on the front lines during Dalek operations. He's arguably the first distinct Dalek character. Although the role of Dalek Supreme will recur on TV, the version in the Dalek Invasion of Earth is destroyed at the end of that story. And while the one seen briefly in The Chase might be the same one as in the Daleks' master plan, you'd never be able to tell, plus that one ends up at the mercy of the Time Destructor.
By the way, me in the edit here, isn't it so exciting we've got 2 more episodes of that back?
Those, however, act more or less like standard Daleks giving orders. They're defined by their roles rather than their distinct characters. The first such Daleks on TV might be the childlike Alpha, Beta and Omega from The Evil of the Daleks. But their role, while impactful, is limited and they vanish into the metaphorical crowd as the story reaches its conclusion. The very fancy Supreme from Planet of the Daleks seems to work from the same HR playbook as Darth Vader, but otherwise exhibits standard Dalek behaviour. The Imperial and Renegade factions from Remembrance of the Daleks have distinct relationships with each other, but only as opposing factions. To the rest of the cast, the two factions may as well be the same. On TV, I'd argue that we don't get a fully realised Dalek character until the Metaltron from 2005's Dalek. Meanwhile, in the TV21 comic, the Dalek Emperor is egotistical, daring, cunning, resourceful. He even keeps a plastic inflatable version of himself handy, for some reason. He's definitely a Dalek, but he doesn't feel like just another drone, and it's exciting to see him react to the latest chaos that has befallen the Daleks. As such, he appears in most of the comic storylines. Whilst hordes of identical Daleks can work well when they're villains on TV, if they're going to be protagonists of their own story, it's much easier to have one character be the viewpoint and make the decisions that drive the story forward, particularly seeing as the comic is a series of one-page weekly strips. The TV21 Emperor is the perfect version of that character archetype for this format. A few months after destruction, a brave new Dalek city rises out of the desert. Sound scans listen for approaching danger.
Dalek Oral Station 8 reports no disturbance for 100,000 odds north and south.
Videoscopes also watch.
Scope 12 to control, meteorites falling in Skyway 754. Scope 10 to patrol, East 12-8 shooting star in your vicinity. Now Skaro is safe from surprise attack. Our city is rebuilt. Our forces are strong. Daleks, once more we shall open up the skies. Our first exploration is to the planet Auric. We will mine its valuable metals. To reach Auric means refueling. Thus, we are constructing this space station.
Daleks on screen look amazing, especially for the era and in particular the budget. Most of the time they look solid and menacing, the props remove any silhouette of a human being so they're not just a performer in a funny suit, and their movement is limited enough to make them feel inhuman and yet still convey their character. When well cared for, the props can look convincingly identical, though that hasn't stopped the likes of Dalek 6388. Removing the issue of monsters like the Cybermen and Centaurans, where supposedly identical races are portrayed by decidedly non-identical human beings. However, the props are expensive, so it's rare that you see more than 4 working hero props in a single story, with various tricks pulled to swell their numbers, ranging from split screen, model work and running the same props around the doorway again and again. Paint one of these props for a different role like a Dalek Supreme and you've removed it from the pool of working drone props. Thus, in most TV Dalek stories, you don't tend to see a lot of variation among them, occasions like The Magician's Apprentice being the exception. Freed from the concern of making TV with the physical props, the comics had much more scope to expand the world of the Daleks. As mentioned before, the Dalek book introduced the first variant in the form of the Emperor, but it also managed to introduce one of the strangest Dalek variants. Behold the Mush Dalek! For all of 3 panels we get to see the only Daleks for whom stairs are not an issue as they battle the delightful sounding Horrorcons. They do return for a brief appearance in Liberation of the Daleks, bringing their total panel count up to 4, but the redesign feels less mad and less fun than the 60s versions. For Dalek Air Attacks, the TV21 comic makes great use of the Hoverbout, a round aerial platform designed to house a single Dalek. Clearly these Daleks have yet to master personal flight. These were introduced as transsolar discs in the Dalek world, along with a kind of gyrocopter called a Hoverbout. It seems the 2 ideas got merged into one pretty quickly. The Hoverbout is one of those lovely ideas that never quite made it into the TV show, but we have seen the Daleks use anti-gravitational discs in Planet of the Daleks, and you can see Daleks pilot small attack craft in The Day of the Doctor and The Time of the Doctor. Hoverbouts proper turn up in the Daleks web series. As for the design of the regular Daleks, the first artist, Richard Jennings, keeps them mostly in their TV colours, but there are exceptions. Duel of the Daleks sees one of the first red Daleks, in this case due to a lab accident, but red Daleks would become more prominent as the strip went on, especially after the movies. There's a particularly snazzy one on the cover of the Dalek Outer Space book. This is all despite the Dalek World book claiming that red objects are invisible to Daleks. Another one of those details best quietly forgotten about. I love Jennings' style in the Daleks. Compared to something like a contemporary issue of Spider-Man with its simple, bright and flat colours, the panels in the Daleks ooze atmosphere and texture. Quite handy when most of the cast is made of metal. The art style simultaneously adds naturalistic depth to the images while also allowing the world to seem bolder and bigger than it ever could on the screen. As the strip progresses, you can definitely feel the influence of the Dalek movies creep in, with the domes of the regular Daleks changing colour and claws beginning to appear about the place. This would reach its zenith in the arc Eric Eden illustrated before handing over to Ron Turner. The Daleks in this strip are as accurate as they would ever be, literally pulling the movie-style Daleks into the strip, including their distinctive black, silver and gold leader. This is also one of the few strips where the Emperor doesn't appear. That said, the colouring seems safer, flatter, less like a dynamic painting and more like a standard comic. It's good stuff by itself, but it's easily the weakest style of the 3 strip artists. Mind you, that one story did produce the best illustration in the series. I refuse to explain the context. King of artists who worked on the strip, however, must be Ron Turner. His time on the strip produces the most distinctive, most colourful, most fun visual style. The Dalek designs become simplified and stylised, but the key proportions remain intact, and this looser approach allows for more colour and design variations than ever before in a way that wouldn't really turn up on screen until The Magician's Apprentice. And even then, that's a collection of props from Dalek history as opposed to concurrent variations on the same design. This doesn't just apply to the Daleks themselves, with a wealth of new Dalek craft, multiple new versions of the Hoverbouts previously introduced, and a Dalek saucer with a Dalek dome atop of it that is adorable. Another design that's unabashedly 60s is the Dalek City, which they end up rebuilding twice over the course of the TV21 comic. Its exterior takes design cues from the version seen in The Dead Planet, but ramps it up to 11. The interiors in particular have so much scale. One of the most unusual aspects is the defense mechanism. The city is covered in sand to hide itself, and Daleks can emerge from the sand to ambush intruders. I wonder if this is why that Dalek in the chase thought it was a good idea before it got itself stuck. There's a wealth of fun designs and art elsewhere in the strips away from the Daleks too. Highlights include the Terracons from the Terracan Harvest, totally dissimilar to the Horrorcons of course. What with Daleks, Vargas, Slivers, Terracons, and getting the vibe of Scarra of Space Australia, with the files being the exception that proves the rule. And the Amaral from the Amaral Challenge. Strange plant creatures that work their way into Dalek casings and burst them open after they observe the Daleks cleansing their planet with fire. An image that predates the Daleks doing the same in the Daleks' master plan. They end up causing such a headache for the Dalek that one saucer ends up burrowing to the centre of the planet to attack the main root of the world. After heavy resistance, a single Dalek is left and exterminates it, destroying the planet. One Dalek can do what it takes the Empire an entire Death Star to achieve. Therefore, if the Daleks in the Empire thought the Daleks would totally win, I am not taking counter-arguments at this time. With a galaxy teeming with strange creatures, the Daleks encountered a variety of threats. Where their usual tactics of overwhelming force didn't work, they would have to get creative.
The invention defies all our efforts. It is operated by a key which must still be in the palace. Why can't we make our own key to unlock the weapon's power? We have tried and failed, Emperor. Here is a Solturian with vital information.
The Pentaray is useless without its key, Dalek.
We do not need it. We are the Daleks. Invincible! Your coming here to reclaim the Pentaray was rash. I order your death.
The betrayal. Wait! I have come here to give you the key to the Pentaray. For a price. One of the things that elevates the Daleks above so many other warrior robot races in Doctor Who is their cunning and intelligence. A war machine or a Quark aren't going to provide you with interesting dialogue or character interactions. Even the Cybermen suffer from this to some extent. They often work more as existential horror about what we may become rather than a driving force in and of themselves, hence why Cyberman stories tend to have a strong human villain or anti-villain to provide help or hindrance to them. Being emotionless and logical makes compelling Cyberman dialogue tricky, unless it's the 80s and David Banks is ignoring the emotionless aspect to excellent effect. By contrast, Daleks' hyper-emotional and aggressive nature makes them much more engaging as characters in and of themselves. They are shown time and time again to be able to work themselves into positions of power without needing to fire a shot, usually with the help of traitors and collaborators.
As mentioned earlier, making the Daleks the protagonists of their own story, particularly one more firmly aimed at kids in the parent show, means keeping some aspects of them out of focus. But part of the fun of having the Daleks in the story is the chaos, exterminations, and the destruction that they cause, regardless of their reasons for doing so. As well as including weird aliens and robots for them to fight, including human collaborators creates a good way to include conflict between humans and Daleks without reducing everything to blasting lasers at each other immediately, while also keeping their adventures enjoyable to read. It's also a good chance to show off the Emperor's cunning, being able to outwit his foes. The first example to discuss is arguably somewhat of an inversion. In Power Play, upon encountering their first ever spacecraft, piloted by Praetorian slavers, the Daleks managed to convince one of the slaves, Sala, to enact a plan giving the Daleks a spaceship in exchange for their freedom. This being the Daleks, slaves don't so much win their freedom as transfer from one set of masters to another. With a slave rebellion already brewing beforehand, it's not long before the slaves manage to take back the spaceship and escape, leaving the Daleks with the theoretical knowledge of space travel only. Side note, there's a traitor to the rebellion in this story called Andor, which may be amusing to Star Wars fans. Meanwhile, in the Pentaray Factor, the trope is played straight. Rather than Geltis entering an agreement with the Daleks for a noble cause, his motivation is greed, pure and simple. The Daleks land on Silturus and arrive as guests to learn their opponent's strength and destroy their mighty Pentaray. Penta means 5, and Ray means Ray. Impressively, their plan involves constructing a replica and pulling the old Swaparoo under the guise of storing machinery for repairs to their spacecraft. Geltis learns of the Daleks' true nature by overhearing their fortune teller Lur, Under is nowhere to be seen, and in exchange for being made ruler of the planet, agrees to provide the Daleks with the key necessary to operate the device. Having already turned traitor against his own people and proved himself untrustworthy, Geltis makes the savvy move of not trusting the Daleks and attacking them with the Pentaray at the first opportunity. Unfortunately for him, he begins monologuing and ends up a victim of a small rock on a long drop. The remaining Daleks, sensing a lost cause, attack the city anyway, and are stopped by a desperate attack with the Pentaray, back in its owner's hands. By this point, the Emperor has long cleared off with most of the fleet. Incidentally, the Emperor has pimped his ride with a custom gold finish, and only doesn't return to continue the attack because he's had a strange DM about infectious rust back home, because that's the kind of comic this is. Traitors assisting the Daleks had been seen in the Daleks' invasion of Earth, with another example added for Daleks' invasion of 2150 AD, but given the nature of that story, the Daleks are clearly in charge anyway. The same applies for the Daleks' master plan, where, despite a wide variety of aliens participating in the construction of the Time Destructor, the Daleks are running the show. Other examples of this archetype include the Controller in Day of the Daleks and Radcliffe and Mike in Remembrance of the Daleks. It's ultimately not surprising that the Daleks have an affinity for these kinds of people, it's exactly what their creator did after all. The first major instance of the Daleks having to work themselves into a position of power comes from the aptly titled The Power of the Daleks, again written by David Whittaker. In this story, 3 Daleks deactivated in their space capsule play the innocents when reawakened by Lesterson, a scientist in a human colony on the planet Vulcan.
I am your servant.
The cliffhanger of a Dalek drowning out the Doctor's protestations repeating that phrase is powerful stuff. This is an interesting development of their TV21 exploits. Whereas in something like the Pentaray Factor, the Daleks are pretending to be envoys and quickly reveal their true colours once they achieve their aims, the 3 stranded Daleks in Lesterson's lab have had their weapons removed and have to pretend to be servile, adding another wrinkle to their deception. Slowly winning Lesterson's trust, they observe the rift in the colony, promising their power to the rebels who are willing to return their weapons, and quietly massing an army, enabled thanks to the colonists' greed and political conflicts blinding them to the Daleks' plans. The Daleks bide their time until the humans are at their absolute weakest before returning to type.
Daleks conquer and destroy. Daleks
This is perhaps the most prominent example of the Daleks working their way into power from a subordinate position, but there are other examples.
Death to the Daleks features the Daleks unable to use their energy weapons and entering a truce with the similarly affected humans, until they switch to using projectile weapons and regain control of the situation through threat of force.
Primitive weapons moderately efficient.
Victory of the Daleks, the best example of this trope in the Revive show, features 3 Daleks playing the role of subservient robots in an ultimately successful attempt to obtain the Doctor's testimony of their purity. For some reason, the logic of this in context gets a bit wonky. It even includes a reference to one of Power's most memorable lines.
I am your soldier.
It's not only the Daleks and their allies being devious. In Ampas, the Zorovians send robot spy agent 2K, I swear I'm not making this up, to prevent either the Daleks or the Mechanoids from winning their impending war, fearing the victor would attack them in turn. 2K even manages to make the Mechanoids call off the war, not so much for the Daleks. 2K is another one of those designs I'd love to see resurrected somewhere in the future. He's very Metropolis. In Legacy of Yesteryear, 3 of the humanoid Daleks have pulled an Yvonne of the Yukon, surviving to be thawed out and confronted with their descendants now inhabiting the casings that once served them. Upon attempting to gain power over them with information, Yiverick isn't even recognised as a Dalek. The present-day Daleks refer to him as a new species, and also oddly as an android. This is something that crops up a lot towards the end of the strip, Daleks referring to androids when they mean human or humanoid, just go with it. This arc also establishes that a few of the blue humanoid Daleks knew about Earth, with both Yiverick and Zet planning to reveal its location to the Daleks. If these are the forebears of the Kalets, they clearly lost the information by Genesis.
It is an established scientific fact that in the 7 galaxies only Skaro is capable of supporting intelligent life.
The story includes multiple incidents of present-day Daleks destroying other Daleks, but always for the greater cause of the Dalek race as a whole compared to the humanoid Daleks selling each other out for power. These incidents aren't limited to this arc. Daleks attack each other to protect themselves from infectious rust, and the Mechanoids manage to bring a Dalek under their control. Dalek on Dalek violence in these cases is either pure survival or for the greater good of the Dalek race. There are conflicts between Daleks, however, that would have far greater consequences.
All Daleks obey the orders of the Emperor. Group 1 will survey the area and plan the best routes. We obey! Group 2 will assemble and transport road-laying equipment. We obey! Finally, Group 3 will be responsible for clearing the mutated flowers and growth around the lake. We obey! Why do we obey? Which Dalek queried the order I gave? I command you to answer.
There is no answer.
Duty is suspended for entire Group 3. Report to Main Control for examination.
The Daleks file into Main Control.
Do you obey commands?
I obey absolutely! Emperor, is this a serious matter?
It is more than serious. That one word, why? It could mean the destruction of the Dalek race.
Daleks are no stranger to war, and on occasion that has been extended towards themselves. Dalek civil wars have been depicted on screen during The Evil of the Daleks as a way to try and write the Daleks out of the show for good. The 1980s Dalek stories had a Dalek civil war engineered by Davros as a key running plot thread. Even as recently as Revolution of the Daleks, we've seen Dalek death squads wage war against an emergent race of Daleks on Earth, along with other isolated examples of Daleks turning on other Daleks for not being pure in their blobbiness.
In particular, it's the 2 classic era civil wars that are prefigured by the TV21 strip in 2 of the most memorable story arcs.
The first is Duel of the Daleks, which features Zeg, a Dalek with a casing made stronger by a freak lab accident. Like all comic book supervillains, he suddenly decides he'd do a much better job being in charge and vies for the leadership of the Daleks, predating Davros' long-term goal to oust the Supreme Dalek.
Supreme Dalek? Ha! That is a title I shall dispute most vigorously. I created the Daleks. It is I who will guide their destiny.
Naturally, upon being presented with a new idea, the Dalek's first instinct is to destroy it.
After the Black Dalek, which by its presentation here I'm assuming is something more akin to the Black Knight than is its normal role, tries and fails, this actually manages to create a schism with some Daleks declaring their loyalty to Zeg. Attempting to hold on to his power, the Emperor logically decides to ask ChatGPT what to do about the situation. In actuality, it's the brain machine, because of course the Daleks can't just call it a computer. and naturally it suggests a duel to the death. The Civil War aspect dies off after this point in the story, the conflict instead changing to a lengthy one-on-one battle between Zeg and the Emperor. And this is perhaps the only aspect of the conflict in the TV stories of the 80s that feels lacking. You don't actually get any interactions between Davros and the Supreme Dalek. This wouldn't be the only time the Emperor was challenged by a Red Dalek. The same briefly happens in 1966's The Dalek Outer Space book. I absolutely love his response.
Is it possible I am not perfect?
Oh, for that self-image. Although maybe not that memory, seeing as by my reckoning this is the third time this has happened to him. It's the evil of the Daleks that draws most on the TV21 comics of this era. One thing that recurs several times throughout the comic strip is Daleks developing unique personalities and traits. This is somewhat present in the TV story The Chase, where certain Daleks exhibit different behaviours.
Compute time lag by a scale.
Captain Magenta, is that you?
This seems strange today. To be fair, it probably seemed strange back then. But the backstory in The Dead Planet specifies the Daleks evolving and mutating into their current forms, which the TV21 backstory retains. Although all Daleks basically act the same, in theory, it's possible for Daleks to change and grow and develop new personalities.
The evil of the Daleks deviates slightly from this and treats Dalek nature as a matter of programming, with the human factor being installed on positronic brains inserted into Alpha, Beta and Omega, and the Dalek factor acting more akin to brainwashing, but still presents Dalek nature as malleable, not inherent in their being. It's not until Genesis of the Daleks that it's confirmed on screen that Daleks are genetically engineered creatures, contradicting their earlier origins. In the TV21 comic, this aspect is absent, and it makes much more sense of the Emperor's desire to quickly put down his challengers. Every single Dalek has the potential to grow and prove themselves a greater leader than him. This aspect to the Emperor ended up returning in the Dalek CGI series, with the Emperor having to deal not only with that week's threat, but with the scheming of his strategist who's after his job. This also ends up highlighting how fragile the Emperor's power is. When everything goes his way, the Daleks seem unstoppable, but when, as in Shadow of Humanity, the second challenge of his power in the TV21 strip, a single Dalek defies an order, the entire system threatens to come crumbling down around him. In this story, a Dalek has learned to appreciate beauty and has decided it is imperative for the Daleks to protect flowers around the Lake of Mutations. You get the wonderfully odd image of Daleks draped in flowers exterminating their fellows for crushing them carelessly. This 1 in a million Dalek seems to have fixated on beauty, ordering its comrades to protect beauty and conflating beauty with strength. The Dalek Emperor is able to assert his own strength again easily, but with multiple Daleks deviating from his rule so quickly shows how hollow Dalek power truly is. The whole thing that starts the Emperor screening the Daleks for a traitor is a simple act of one of them asking why when told to obey. This aspect was carried over into David Whittaker's script for The Evil of the Daleks, where the first seeds of discord are sown as one of the Doctor's humanized Daleks does the same.
Why? Who spoke? Who questioned the Dalek command?
The moment this is reported, the Doctor is able to make the Emperor concerned enough to have all Daleks pass through the arch to be given the Dalek factor. However, the Doctor has been able to switch the arc to transmit the human factor. And with enough Daleks questioning their orders, war inevitably breaks out in the Dalek city. Within an hour of the first Dalek disobeying, the might of the Daleks vanishes.
End. The final end.
Are all the androids dead?
Yes, Emperor. All that remains is this.
The burnt paper told us the androids come from a planet in the next universe but one. It has always been our blind spot. A planet called Earth. The Daleks shall go in search, and we shall conquer. We shall conquer Earth.
We shall conquer Earth. We shall conquer Earth. We shall
The danger to come. The Daleks are, from a certain point of view, Doctor Who's strangest enemies in that they have such a distinct identity outside of their parent series. No other creation in the Doctor Who universe feels as thoroughly well fleshed out and defined as the Daleks, and much of that can be tied back to the merchandising boom of the 60s and the TV21 strip. Details ranging from the Daleks' command structure, their technology, even Rels, their unit of time, comes from this era's adventures outside the show. It's perhaps no wonder that their creator, Terry Nation, attempted to launch the Daleks into a series of their own, given how they have been received thus far. The comic Dalek stories outside of the Doctor Who TV show are detailed, colourful, bold and unique. the Doctor Who universe as a whole would surely be a less interesting place without the contributions they made.
If you're interested in checking out the TV21 Dalek strips, they were most recently reprinted in this Doctor Who magazine special from 2020, so if you can find this for a decent price, then that's your best bet. It also includes an interview with Ron Turner in there. Cheers for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.